Hey, welcome to period 6 of AP World History, 1900 to 2014. Today we're going to talk about that first key concept, science and the environment. Straight from the course guide, rapid advances in science altered the understanding of the universe and the natural world and led to the development of new technologies. These changes enabled unprecedented population growth, which altered how humans interacted with the environment and threatened delicate ecological balances at local, regional, and global levels. And what in the world does that mean? So let's kind of break this down. First, think about someone who was born in the year 1750, lived a nice long life, and died in, say, 1840. Now, what major changes occurred in how that person lived his or her daily life? Maybe you made a big change. Maybe you moved into a city and got a job in a factory during your lifetime. But most likely, your daily life was relatively unaltered. Now, imagine someone like my great-grandfather. His family came straight off a boat from Sicily in 1906. Next year he was born in 1907. This is New York in 1907. He lived until 1999. So here's New York now. The changes he saw in his life were enormous. That generation really witnessed some vast changes. So today we're going to talk about some of the three big changes in the 20th century. We're going to talk about science, the environment, and population. These three changes had impacts on and were impacted by all the other major 20th century topics. And they were accompanied by social, political, and economic ideas. So first, a quick review of these world history themes, the 5 themes of world history. First, the interaction between humans and the environment. Second, development and interaction of cultures. Third, state building, expansion, and conflict. Fourth, creation, expansion, and interaction of the economic systems. And fifth, development and transformation of social structures. Quickly, right away, just a quick brief thinking, you can see that science, environment, and population are going to play a key role in all of those. And we'll come back to that later. So first, we're going to talk about scientific advancements. These are the driving factors behind the fast pace of change in the 20th century. So first, electricity, Beginning in the late 19th century, electric power started to arrive in people's homes and businesses, mostly the ones, though, located in the cities in the United States and Western Europe. And through time and over the course of the 20th century, that grid expanded and is covering most of the world today. But what did this do? So in homes, if you lived in your home, that might mean you now have lights on and you have a stove, an electric stove to cook food, and you have a refrigerator in which to store that food. You can listen to the radio and later watch TV, or later than that play video games or work on the computer. In businesses, that's going to mean different working hours, new forms of mechanization of labor. Put those two together, what happens in the home, what happens in businesses, and you're going to see changing sleep patterns, changing work patterns, and changing consumer choices. Next big change is communication. So the telephone started as a toy for the rich, really. Only those wealthy people in the big cities with a lot of communication technology had access to that. But during the economic boom in the roaring 20s, more and more people could afford a telephone in their home. Now, interestingly, this technology really didn't change much from the 1920s until cell phones became widely available in the 80s. But the same pattern emerged with cell phones. First, it was the rich. Then they spread and finally became really a necessity in the industrialized, developed world. A little more about communication. Radio and the television, what they did. The radio is originally a device for one-to-one communication, kind of a wireless telegraph. But by the 20s, broadcasts were made for a national audience, sports and news and entertainment. After World War II, television gained so much popularity that, kind of fun fact here, in the 1960s, more American homes had a television than an indoor toilet. Thinking about priorities here. The television is another example of one of those positive feedback loops in world history. On TV, you're seeing what it means to be a part of this new consumer culture, and what that's showing is that you have a television in your house. So it's kind of spreading itself. Both TV and radio are going to be used by governments at different times to propagate their messages to their citizens as well as kind of send messages to their enemies. Next form of communication, computers and the internet. So 1940s, you got those huge computers that take up entire rooms. But by the 1980s, personal computers were becoming available to the public. 1990s, we see the advent of internet, and along with that, price drops in PCs, which is going to lead to that global phenomenon that we know today, as everyone has access to that in our world. Um, the internet connects billions of people and businesses, but there are still parts of the world with little or no internet, primarily in Africa and Central Asia, although we're seeing some improvement in those communications and those connections. Now we're to transportation. So the automobile, let's start with that. First introduced in Germany in the late 19th century, but like radio and telephones, really didn't become popular until the 20s. Cars served a lot of purposes and changed a lot of things, increased mobility. Thinking about dating, you could finally get away from the watchful eye of your parents while you're out on a date. Life is moving to suburbs. People are moving away from cities, and that's going to change the structure of our nation, really. People could drive on vacation. You could go somewhere. It's going to also open up new jobs and new industries, the whole petroleum industry, the travel industry, road construction, especially those funded by the government. It's going to lead to a decrease in the use of public transportation, both by consumer choice and in a lot of cases we see some connection between the executives of some of those major car companies buying out the public transportation to force people into buying cars. Also going to lead to increased rush hour traffic fatalities, and increased air pollution. Next, talk about the airplane. The first application of airplanes on a wide scale was World War I, used for different purposes, spying and then later dropping bombs, and then looking for air supremacy. Air travel really early on was just for the wealthy and famous, until that economic boom after World War II, when finally the middle class is going to be able to afford to join that so-called jet set and fly around. By the end of the 20th century, passenger air travel pretty common, but it still didn't surpass the use of the automobile. That's going to be our main means of transportation, especially in the United States. But in the United States, it definitely overcame the use of the passenger train, which for 100 years had been the dominant force in public transportation. And the last thing about transportation we're going to talk about is space. Now, space travel isn't really a common mode of transportation, but the introduction in the mid-20th century did mark a huge technological step that humans had dreamt about for millennia. Liquid-fueled rockets, experimental in the 20s. They were used as weapons by the Germans in World War II. After World War II, the Soviet Union launched the first missile to orbit the Earth in the 1950s. Quickly, the United States, the Soviet Union's rival, followed to launch a missile. The race to the moon during the Cold War kind of fired imaginations in the 60s, won by the United States, the first to land on the moon. But after the fall of communism, the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, the United States and Russia became partners in space exploration, jointly run International Space Station. And today, where we stand, there are other nations and organizations involved, particularly China, the European Space Agency, and they have launched missiles into space also. But the enormous expense of space travel means that only the wealthiest nations can afford to be a part of this. Some of the technology from the space program has made its way into our hands, consumers' hands, such as miniaturizing electronic components, GPS systems, medical imaging, and of course, can't forget, non-stick coating for cooking.